Thank you. Now, the attack of September 2002 that you came under, who led it? Who attacked you? Answer. It was the beginning of the rebellion in Côte d'Ivoire. And as such, it was not only the École de Gendarmerie that came under Agban camp. Many people died. At the École, we didn't have any deaths, but in Agban there were many deaths. Yamoussoukro came under attack. It was the beginning of the rebellion in Côte d'Ivoire. Question. I'm going to put the question to you. We've understood what you said, but let me put the question to you so that it's crystal clear. Who attacked you on that day? You and the other barracks. Who? Who was attacking the Ivorian security forces? Answer. It was the rebels. Later, people claimed to have commanded the attack, namely former soldiers of the army who were in Bouaké, and subsequently political claims were made that the political wing was under the command of the president of the current assembly, Mr. Soro Guillaume. Question. Very well. Can you give us a name or two of military chiefs, rebel military chiefs who claimed responsibility for those actions? Answer. There was Commander Ouattao, and there was especially one whose name escapes me, but he is the Préfet de Police today. He spoke, he gave his name, he is Préfet de Légion today.
Je vais vous rafraîchir la mémoire.
Question. I'm going to refresh your memory. Is it Diofossé? Answer. Precisely. Question. Very well. Now, the second attack you're talking about, 2006. Who was it led by? I have understood that it was not only you who came under attack, not only your barracks, but who attacked you? Same question as for the previous attack. Answer. We believe that it was the same movement, the same rebel movement, to the extent that the power-taking process had not been completed. So we believe it was the same objective, that is the initial objective, to take power, because regularly the national television was coming under attack. Question. Well, what you say comprises a number of elements. The same people, are these the same names as the ones you gave to us who were holding the reins? Answer. For that second attack, no claims of responsibility were made, so we could not clearly identify 1, 2, or 3 individuals to say that they were behind this attack.
D'accord.
Question. Very well.
Mais vous avez dit, je vais vous citer.
But you said, and I quote you, a moment ago, you said, page 80 of the French transcript, the real-time version, we believe that it was the same rebel movement to the extent that the power-taking process was not yet complete. So we thought that it was the same people. Then it's not very clear, but the idea was to reach the same objective. Well, so what leads you to believe that? Answer. Well, these are our own suppositions. We have no objective material element to say who was behind that second attack. I must be clear enough on this.
Alors, qu'est-ce que vous...
Question. So, what do you mean by the phrase or the expression, the power-taking process that was not complete. What is that, this power-taking process? In 2002 was with a view to taking power, and as it was not successful, then the recurrent attacks that we came under, we then attributed to the reason behind the first attack. But we did not have any objective, clear elements saying that such and such a person had claimed responsibility for it.
Et ce processus s'est poursuivi après?
Question, and that process continued after 2006, did it?
Je n'ai pas souvenir que...
Answer, I have no recollection of any attacks being perpetrated against us in the year 2006 or towards the end of 2006, apart from the one I mentioned at the beginning of 2006. There might have been a few clashes willy-nilly, but...
Alors, il y a quelques minutes,
Question, now a few moments ago, you spoke to us about attacks on the RTI at the time. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Il y a eu une attaque contre la...
Question, there was an attack on the RTI between 2002... No, before 2002. Before 2002. There was a violent attack. And we had received instructions from the commander of the gendarmerie to intervene. We lost one officer and one non-commissioned officer during this defense operation of the RTI. There were other attacks where other gendarmes also lost their lives in defending the RTI.
d'autres attaques?
Question, other attacks after that on the RTI? Is that what you mean? Answer, yes. Question, when? Answer, well, I can't put a date to it. Approximately, I don't know quite exactly when, but I can't really put a date to it.
D'accord.
Question, very well.
Alors,
So, then from the year 2006 onwards and the years following 2007, 2008, 2009 up to the crisis, were there any other attacks upon the École de la Gendarmerie? Came into effect. Really, things calmed down. So, with regard to the École de Gendarmerie, apart from the post-election crisis in 2010-2011, we didn't come under attack between 2007 and 2010.
d'accord.
Very well. With regard to the attacks upon the RTI, the various attacks you've just made mention of, namely the first attack that you said was particularly violent in nature, who attacked?
On n'a jamais identifié.
Unsuccessful, because we were a little bit more on the ball than the assailants. And that can be put down to IB, because on that day when the security forces, defense and security forces intervened, not only did they catch those who were about to attack, but they also seized from them a computer that had a lot of information on it. Attack plans, the speeches that were due to be given, a lot of information that the Directorate General of the Police retrieved in order to continue their investigations.
D'accord. Alors, si vous permettez...
Question, very well. So let's make things very clear by taking things one at a time. First of all, the attack on the RTI, which you talked about earlier, which I think occurred in 2002. I understood that it was difficult for you to identify and name the attackers, the assailants, but who were they, generally speaking? Were they rebels?
Oh, pardon, pour être précis.
Oh, sorry. We're talking about 2002, and then I'm going to ask you questions about the RTI attack by IB. But now I'm talking to you about the first attack that you mentioned to us. Answer. Well, we see the attackers, and all the attackers that we saw coming, we would give a generic name of rebels. That's what we would say at the time.
D'accord.
Question, very well. Now, the second attack, the one you were talking about, led by IB, approximately when did it occur? Answer, after 2007 or during the year 2007. Question, very well. And you said to us that a computer with the attack plans and the speeches that were due to be made after the attack, and its successful attack, were they taken by the gendarmes? Yes, they were taken by the Defence and Security Forces that used the information and who were ahead of the attackers. So they quite simply rounded them up, and they had this computer on them. Question, very well. So these assailants, because their plan was now accessible, what was that plan, or what were those plans? Who did they want to install in power or bring to power?
Je ne sais pas, c'est IB.
Answer, I don't know. It was IB. These are the images we talked about when the police investigated. The images that came out of the computer was Chief Sergeant Koulibaly Ibrahim. He was the one who was really putting himself to the forefront in those images in the computer. Question, he didn't say who he was working for. Answer, I don't remember. Question, very well.
À votre connaissance, y a-t-il eu d'autres attaques?
To your knowledge, were there any other attacks on the RTI in these subsequent years? Answer, I no longer recall, with the exception of those that took place during the post-election crisis.
D'accord.
Question, very well. To your knowledge, how many attacks were there on the RTI during the post-election crisis?
You may respond. Because I saw that you do not respond because you had not the attention of of the questioner, but you may respond because you have my attention in any case.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The witness. Thank you, Mr. President.
I mean, of course.
The attacks upon the RTI, when they occurred, I was no longer present because I was the director.
Vous nous avez parlé des attaques. Je reviens à quelques...
Question, you talk about attacks. Let me come back a little bit. You talked about attacks upon the gendarmerie barracks in 2002 and the victims thereof. During the rebellion of the 18th of September 2002, did any other members of the gendarmerie lose their lives, apart from those who lost their lives in the attacks upon the barracks that you mentioned a few moments ago? Answer: the gendarmerie paid a heavy price during the first months of that crisis in 2002.
Attack.
Not only during the attack on the Abidjan barracks, notably the Agban barracks, there were many non-commissioned officers that were killed. I don't know the number now, but much later on, in the various units, there were a number of people who lost their lives, namely those units in the north of the country. But something that was quite shocking was what happened in Bouaké. In Bouaké, where the commanding officer and approximately 60 of his elements were massacred.
Y compris, dit-on,
Including, it is said, some members of their family, namely children.
Massacré par qui?
Question: and they were massacred by whom? Answer: in Bouaké, by the rebellion. Question: and who was heading up the rebellion in Bouaké? Answer: there were many military chiefs. I don't know who was in charge, but there were many military chiefs in Bouaké saying that they were from the rebellion, many of them in Bouaké.
Après l'attaque rebelle,
Question: after the rebel attack in September 2002, did gendarmes remain in position in the rebel area, namely the north of Côte d'Ivoire? Answer: they were forcibly imprisoned. A number of them lost their lives, and the most lucky managed, under their own steam, to get to the free area. And it was each to his own, you know.
Your Honour, I'm loath to interrupt my learned friend, but we've been there's been questioning for quite a while now on the pre-2010 period. And I know Your Honours have very recently issued some direction to us all on that, on the 6th of February, in which you made it very clear that we should, I thought, seek permission before going before 2010, which I did in my own questioning. So I would say, I think now is enough. And I would ask that perhaps there is some indication of the relevance of this line of questioning, if it is indeed to continue, because I think it's been long enough now.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Altid, thank you. To begin with, I'm trying to go as fast as possible, and I hope to conclude in less time than the prosecution. I don't want to put the cat before the horses, so there's no question of delays here. To the contrary. Secondly, you imagine that the attacks against the RTI is of concern to us, especially if carried out by the same people. I'm not going to insist, but I can elaborate. The witness is here, so I will not go beyond this. Thirdly, this is an exchange, and we need to be clear. According to the prosecutor, there was a common plan. We are not the ones who imagined the narrative. We were talking about 2001. We can go to the temporal jurisdiction concerning the charges, or we may not. Or we can go to 2010. That is okay with us too. So you cannot have your cake and eat it. So I believe that this should be resolved. If you want, we can dwell on this, but I would like to progress. We can go very quick, but if you want us to speak about it for a moment, we will do that. But we have a framework, and there is the ins and outs of attacks. There is a logic. It is the same protagonists with the same logic, the same causes, the same effects. I believe that I have said everything. And this is the case of the defense. It is to present what we believe is the truth. The reality, the OTP, cannot tell us which questions to ask and not to ask. This framework was established by the OTP. If they want to say that everything started in 2010, well, then that's okay with us.
Well, I must say that I kept silent for a long time because I can see that there is a logic to go back a little bit to develop. But I have it here. I was going to interrupt you myself, asking you please to come to an end with rehearsing the first 10 years of Côte d'Ivoire and to come as soon as possible to the charges, to what is the core of this trial, meaning the period from just before the elections until the April, so say 2010, 2011.
Mr. Altid, Mr. President, I totally agree with what you have said, but you have seen that all my questions from the very beginning were focused on what happened in 2010, 2011. But I'm just coming back slightly to discuss the ins and outs. And it reflects that that is what provoked the prosecutor's reaction, but it is essential to understand what happened later. But I would like to point out that we are complying fully with your decision on the conduct of proceedings to save time. The chamber has as mandate to discover the truth. Mr. Altit is reading very, very fast.
Alors, je présente mes excuses.
Mr. Altit, I'm sorry. I apologize to the interpreters. I am trying to save time, and I will read slowly. It is paragraph 30. The chamber has as mandate to discover the truth. And in order to avoid recalling witnesses to the court, the questions of the non-calling party will not be limited to the framework of the questioning by the party that had called the witness, subject to the fact that these questions they asked those questions. The questions had been asked by the other party. I will slow down. I'm trying, Mr. President, to limit myself to your instructions using the margin for maneuver that you asked us to use the information indispensable to understand what happened in the 2010-2011. So I come back there from time to time, and it seems to me to be crucial for the ascertainment of the truth. So we are trying to maintain that balance, and it is to the benefit of everyone to discover the truth. We cannot limit ourselves to abstract notions.
Now, you were interrupted. I would have probably interrupted you a few minutes later, as the OTP did, intervening, and I'd want you absolutely to go out of balance, but I think the balance point is nearly reached. So this is what I want to say. Do your job. Do your job. It's clear, but we should then focus more on what happened in 2010, 2011. The margin of maneuver, of course, you have it, but it's finishing as far as the past is concerned. So please go ahead, but let's come also to the core of the or let's get back to the core of the trial. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Prt, thank you, Mr. President. Absolutely, this was my intention, but with your leave, I have 3 more questions on this topic. If you allow, I will ask them, and then we would have concluded that point. Mr. Witness, since there were no gendarmes there, if I understood you well, and this period started in 2002, but ended in 2010. So we are really approaching the time of the crisis. That is where I was driving at. Now, during that period, Mr. Witness, from September 2002 up till 2010, who was protecting the population in the north of the country, since there were no longer any gendarmes? Answer, that I do not know. I do not know. Those who occupied the area organized themselves in a way to protect the population with the resources and the men that they had, because for some time, not only were there no gendarmes, there was no administration, no justice, and no prefects, no sub-prefects, no mayors, and so on and so forth. Question, very well. We will move on to something else. At the École de Gendarmerie, or maybe even at the SECOS, did you have any cooperation with the French army? Were there any training courses, any exchanges, any type of cooperation? Answer. Cooperation with the French army at the Gendarmerie School stopped after the crisis of 2004. Question, very well. Now, you have told us that some students of the Gendarmerie School could be mobilized as reserve forces, and I'm referring to page 10 of the French transcript of the 27th of March. In case of crisis, and that was provided for by the instruments in force. Now, which texts or instruments were you referring to? Answer. The texts setting up the École de Gendarmerie of Abidjan, and which state clearly that the school shall be a reserve force for interventions. Question, very well. But you told us and who had already been trained and who were part of that reserve, and students who were not yet trained and who were not part of that reserve force. So please clarify. Answer. For practical reasons, the commander of the school and his officers made a distinction between the students of the second year who could in fact constitute a reserve force for interventions because they already had 1 year of military training behind them. They had all the basic knowledge, profession of soldier, and those ones were not necessarily included in the reserve force for interventions. Question, very well. How many presidents of the Republic did you know during your career ever since you were a commander, whether ever since you had commands under you? Answer. I was the commander of a departmental gendarmerie company in the birthplace of President Dje for about 5 years, and he did me the honor of receiving me every time he visited his town of origin. After that, I was the commander of the École de Gendarmerie for 2 years, or rather 1 year, under General Dje Bi. That is when he was President of the Republic. But before that, I was commander of the transmissions service of the National Gendarmerie for a period of 4 years, and President Houphouët Boigny was still alive and the President of Cote d'Ivoire. Now, as commander of the École de Gendarmerie as from 2000, this was under President Gbagbo. Question, very well. Now let us move on to something else. You have explained to us page 30 of the French transcript of the 27th of March, and also on page 34 of that same French transcript, you said that SECOS had been created to fight against major delinquency in the district of Abidjan. You were the first commander of that structure. Now, which was the first mission of SECOS? In other words, I can be more specific. What were your priorities at the time of your appointment?
Ma priorité.
Answer. My priority at the time of my appointment and I told the chief of staff, when he did me the honor of receiving me, once I knew my mission, I would not want undue interference in the implementation of my daily activities. That was my first concern. I didn't want interference from external individuals in the daily activities of my unit. Secondly, I asked him whether it was possible that every need that I would express, that a good part of those needs would be made available so that I should become immediately operational. And then there was the selection of the men. I presented that to him. And lastly, I prepared a draft organization chart, a draft structure that I presented to him. That is what I did immediately after I was appointed.
Et le chef d'état-major?
Question. And did the chief of staff accept the conditions that you put forward prior to appointment? Answer. I cannot say these were conditions. I'm a soldier. I was at the disposal of the chief of staff. I could not impose conditions on him. These were simply my concerns so that I could become operational and effective. He reassured me that he would try to make it possible for those conditions to be fulfilled. Question. Very well. And from a practical perspective, according to your own words, your concerns were accepted. You were appointed at the head of SECOS. Now, you were fighting against what? What was your first intervention? Where did you need to intervene? What did you decide would be your priority intervention from the moment you became commander of SECOS? Answer. I was fortunate enough to have two collaborators who were senior officers of the National Police, Commissioner Brendu and Commissioner Robé. These were very professional men who were very familiar with delinquents, the situation of delinquency and criminality in Abidjan. So from the very beginning, they provided information, and as soon as we had our resources, we started going into the neighborhoods where it was urgent to intervene. Question. Very well. You have talked about urgency. What type of delinquency did you target at that time? What were the emergency situations? Answer. Hold-ups in the residences, hold-ups of vehicles, armed robbery of all sorts. And then the chief of staff had also insisted that we had elements outside who would be prepared to defend against any initial attacks. We have been talking about those types of attacks a short while ago. Question. So this should be clear. During the period of your appointment, 2005 early 2006. This was a period during which answer, I talked about ordinary criminality, and then he also told us that on the television station, these were the types of attacks that the Chief of Staff had been referring to that concerned all the defense and security forces.
Alors, vous nous avez dit...
Question, very well. You told us that you created and set up 2 different structures. And this is page 62 of the French transcript of the 27th of March. There was the group d'appui, the support group, which was also known as the Python units, and then the BMO, the Law and Order Maintenance Unit. Now let us begin with the Python units. In answer to a question from the prosecution about the number of men, line 18, you said approximately 80. Now, 80 people in that unit. If you take away from that number those who were sick, and then those who had gone off service and were resting, so out of those 80, how many of them could possibly be having operational availability of about 6 patrols ready to swing into action? That is about 6 times 6 people available. Then I think that would have been adequate. Question. What you are telling us is that 36 men or members working or active at the same time was the objective. Answer. No, that is not what we were looking for. I'm saying that if we had those people at our base, those who were ready to be active, if we had 6 patrols of 6 individuals each, we would have been as effective as we would have wanted. Question, very well. If I have understood you well, the question, very well, I believe that when the prosecutor asked you that question, you answered. And also in relation to the number of operational vehicles. Now, can you tell us the number of operational vehicles available to those 36 men active at the same time? Answer. Our objective was to have at least 5 or 6 double cabin vehicles available that would be functional, but we did not always have them, given that there were breakdowns, problems of fuel, and so on and so forth. Can you hear me now? Answer, yes. Question. Approximately how many of them were functional at the same time? That is, vehicles. Answer, if we really made efforts, we would have 4 vehicles available at the same time. So if the vehicles were well maintained and followed up, then it was possible to have 4 vehicles available at the same time. question very well. Let me seize this opportunity to ask you the same questions. The answer was that you did not remember precisely. Can we do the same exercise? I will ask you the question approximately. Answer, I do not know precisely when it comes to the BMO, because the BMO was not used regularly. It was a unit that had a special mission, law and order enforcement. And since during that period, the enforcement of law and order was not a frequent activity, I really do not remember, but at that time it was not really our priority. That is the BMO.
My learned friend, there are questions here that are quite broad, and I wonder if we could just be more specific as to times, because I'm not really following whether we're talking still about 2005 or whether we've moved on in relation to these particular units to the crisis.
I think it's generally speaking after these two units were created, but have you something specific in mind as far as the timing is concerned?
We are going to clarify. The intention of the questions is to have more details. Mr. Witness, the idea is to know how many vehicles and how many men did each of those new units that you created yourself had. Obviously, in theory, under ideal circumstances, and then in practice. We were not talking about the beginning of the crisis, but let's talk about it now. At the beginning of the crisis, the groupe d'appui had 4 vehicles in 2005 that were functional at the same time. What was the situation in 2010? Were there more or fewer, or was the situation the same? Answer. The groupe d'appui had about 5 or 6 vehicles at the beginning of the crisis. As to the BMO, we had at least 2 troop transport vehicles, and that is what made it possible to place them at the disposal of the National Police. So it was with these troop transport vehicles that they were put at the disposal of the National Police.
D'accord. Et c'est
Question, very well. And these 5 to 6 vehicles and these 2 troop transportation vehicles were all up and running at the beginning of the crisis at the same time, were they? Answer, yes. Question, very well. So this brings me to ask you, and we did this earlier on for the groupe d'appui, the number of staff of the BMO who could be on duty at the same time. I think you made mention of 300 number of people in total. How many, once we take into account those people who were sick, those who are resting, could be, how many people could put in service or on duty at the same time in the year 2005, 2006, and then again at the beginning of the crisis? Was there an evolution upwards or downwards, or was it stable? Answer. In approximately 2010, the gendarmerie placed at our disposal shields and batons, and also grenades. So, this meant that in addition to the few kalash that we had, within the BMO, we could line up the equivalent of approximately 2 half platoons, that is 15 on one side, 15 on the other, because that was the capacity, the transport capacity for our troop vehicles. Question, very well. You've just talked about grenades. What type of grenades? Answer, the law enforcement grenades.
The numbers and the grenades and
No.
I think then I have a bad recollection, but I think we have it.
Très bien.
Mettre le titre. Very well. Now, for law enforcement, what do you mean? Are they tear gas? Are they smoke gas? And some of them are also stunning. And you have all of this on the record, Mr. President, you're right in so saying.
Old but not old enough.
Alors, depuis quand était...
Question. So, since when had the situation been insecure on this northern highway? Because you felt the need to set up a highway police unit. And who were the villains? For us to understand the reason behind you setting up this unit. Answer, I don't know who the villains were. I do not know who they were. I observed that the level of delinquency and criminality had shot up to such a degree that the transportation vehicles and the people who travelled could no longer travel at night time. And even in the daytime there were attacks. So the minister was quite affected like that, and we then followed his instructions, but I do not know the identity of the villains. Question, we're not talking about identity, we're talking about, what I want to know is where this delinquency comes from. Is it refugee delinquency? Is it delinquency from groups coming from elsewhere? Is it social delinquency? Why was there delinquency there and then and not beforehand? Answer, well, I didn't conduct such studies. I didn't conduct any such studies. Question, very well.
Le fait qu'il y ait eu...
Question, the fact that a SECOS antenna was set up in each of the 5 major communes in Abidjan, did that mean that in the neighbourhoods there were not enough policemen and gendarmes to fight daily delinquency?
Je pense que ça, c'est...
Answer, I believe that these questions should be put to the authorities. I had a mission, and I believe that this question should be put to the authorities. I had a mission, and it was to provide security for individuals and their possessions. And in that regard, I had put in place a structure that was accepted, and the unit was up and running.
Alors, il vous a été posé...
Question. So the question was put to you on a number of occasions with regard to the chain of command, and on the basis of your answers, and do tell me if I have understood you correctly, it transpires that you were a subordinate as commander of the gendarmerie. You were subordinate to the director of the national gendarmerie. As commander of the SECOS, on an operational level, you were under the chief of staff of the army, and at a logistical level, you came under the Ministry of Defense. Is that correct? Answer, yes. Question, very well.
Et en outre,
And in addition, on the occasion of one-off demonstrations that we talked about on the 16th of September 2010, you could have been placed under the authority of, for example, the Director General of the National Police, of the National Gendarmerie. Is that correct? Answer, it's not exactly that. The SECOS was not placed under the authority of the Director General of the Police, correction. The detachments of the SECOS were placed at the disposal of the Director General of the Police at his behest and according to his needs.
d'accord.
Question, very well.
Plus concret.
And in concrete terms, how did things work? Did the original or the core of origin, in particular the police and the gendarmerie, send you men to you, the SECOS, that you would then give over to the various sectors or to the groupe d'appui or to the BMO? Did they send you some men for a given time and then they would go back to their core of origin, or did they stay at the SECOS? How did it work? Because, you know, I'm sorry, I just let me finish my question. Because you, if I understood you correctly, had 45% of gendarmes, 45% of policemen, 5% of the army. So how did this rotation, if you like, function? Because they did have a core of origin. Answer. The commander of the SECOS voices his needs to these two major corps, and then, to the extent of what is available, is placed at his disposal the resources in men that he needs. And as all the men of the SECOS were still, from an organic standpoint, under the authority of their major commanders, the daily management came from their core of origin, and if after 2 or 3 years of presence in the SECOS, well, some of them could be recalled by the core of origin and they would be replaced. The same people wouldn't stay for too long, and if we weren't happy with the performance of some of the elements, we would suggest that the core of origin recall them and replace them.
D'accord.
Question, very well. Page 41 of the French transcript of the 27th of March, in response to questions on Commissioner Robet, who headed up the SECOS planning division. And you said that he was managing the planning, he compiled reports, and he drew up the SECOS statistics. Now, my question to you is a simple one. What was his place in the hierarchy of SECOS? Would you say he was number 2, number 3, number 4? Can you please shed light on the matter?
Le numéro 2.
Answer. Number 2 of the SECOS was the second in command of SECOS.
J'attends le transcrit, monsieur, hein, ne vous inquiétez pas.
Maître Altit, I'm just waiting for the transcript, Your Honour. Please don't worry, I'm just waiting to see what has been transcribed.
D'accord.
Question, very well. But Mr. Robet, what number was he? Answer, well, he doesn't have a number. He was an officer. Within the SECOS, he didn't have a particular number.
Des missions qu'il remplit.
With regard to the missions that he was fulfilling, these were very important missions, and it goes without saying that he and the commander of SECOS, or the second in command of SECOS, would often discuss matters. They would often discuss the march, the activities of the SECOS, etc. But he didn't have any, what can we call it? He didn't have any higher rank than the head of the division. Question, very well.
Est-ce qu'il allait sur le terrain, le comité?
Did Commissioner Robet go out into the field? Answer. In order to establish some form of liaison with the commandant, the sector commander, he would go and see him to tell him the results of his sector over a week or two, and then they'd have a discussion about those results, and if they weren't very satisfactory, he would explain to him so that measures be taken for this to be corrected. But as to going out on the ground, well, he hasn't got any troops, so he can't go out on the ground. And the rare occasions when he did go out was the day of the march that I mentioned, because we no longer had any officers and it was rather delicate. So I wanted to have somebody with a lot of experience, and he had